at the end of the year, we will have used 300,000 of the 450 that we budgeted in terms of fund balance. Then we've also updated our projections for the general government, the city transfer. At the city council meeting 2 Mondays ago, they projected where they believe revenue will be at the end of this fiscal year. So much like at the end of FY19, they gave us the additional revenue of nearly 400,000. For FY20, we're projecting that we'll see a decrease in our transfer of $500,000. The other decrease that we're projecting is a decrease in sales tax collections for the last quarter of this fiscal year. We've included a projection of a 30% decrease, but sales tax is hard to project because we receive our sales tax based on statewide sales. We also receive it 2 full months after it occurs. So all the sales that occur in March translate into revenue for us in May. So the first time we're going to see the actual impact of March will be May, and then the impact that we'll see in April will be reflected in June. But all of the months of the fiscal year, so even the revenue we receive in July and August, are still revenue for activities in this fiscal year, so they'll impact this fiscal year. Overall, when we look at our revenue expenditures in total, you can see that we're projecting revenue to be 1.4 million lower than we had budgeted. So when we look at how we're going to address that revenue shortfall, it'll be through expenditures that are lower than we had budgeted. So first, our overall salaries were underspent by 1.1% in FY19. And we project that in FY20, we're going to underspend our salaries by 1.3%, which is a savings of $430,000. For comparison, in FY18, we underspent our salaries by 2.8%. And as a result of that, we started budgeting for salary lapse to reduce that variance in FY19. And later this evening, we'll talk more about adjusting that salary lapse. I'm trying to tighten our salaries. When we look at the projected ending balance for salaries, this is higher than we projected the last time we went over a monthly monitoring report. And that's really due to some of the impacts for COVID as we look at the end of this fiscal year. So for the remainder of the school year, we're committed to paying our employees through the end of the year. So for employees who had variable pay, to determine their pay, we looked at the higher of the average of their last 2 pay periods, or looking at the average of 2, 3, and 4 pay periods. That methodology doesn't take into account some of the activities that sometimes happen in spring where we have higher expenditures. So whether it's additional substitutes, the impacts of field trips, spring athletic events, and other things. So as a result of those canceled events, we're projecting that our salary fallout will be higher than the last time we had met with you. When we look at our benefits, we're expending at a percentage that's ever so slightly higher than FY19. So in FY19, we had an unspent benefit percentage of 2.4%, and we're projecting here that we'll have 2.1% unspent in benefits. So that would be a savings of $240,000. So lastly, when we look at our logistics accounts, what we've done here for you this evening is we've maintained the projections that we had at the previous month. And Michelle has been working with all of the departments and schools to go through and to evaluate every single purchase order that we have open, to look at where will we have expenditures that we've already incurred them or things that we must pay for. So for example, we'll still have to pay for our utilities. So even though school is closed and we went through all the buildings and ensured we've unplugged everything, we know that just in order to maintain humidity and other levels, we'll still have utility expenses. In addition to that, we're looking at all of our other categories of purchasing, and the next time we get together, we'll update those projections. We have put in place a spending freeze for the remainder of this year, so we do only expect to have expenditures for those essential things that we cannot avoid. The last category on this chart is transfers and reserves, and that reflects our unspent contingency and reserve accounts. So overall, when you look at the projections in total, we project to both underspend our expenditures and under-receive our revenue by $1.4 million. And we believe with that, we'll have a balanced budget. The last thing in this report are all of the detailed information by object level for revenue and expenditures, and that starts on page 9. So thank you for the opportunity this evening to present the monthly monitoring report.
Thank you, Ms. Michael.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
No, I was just going to say thank you, Ms. Michael, and ask if there are any questions real quickly from board members. All right, seeing none, Dr. Noonan, go ahead, thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to dive in now to the presentation itself. And the first slide that we want to come back to is why do we exist as a school division? And one of the things that we are excited to see are our students on the screen and many of our staff members. And just remember that it's their smiling faces that keep us coming to work each day and keep us focused on doing the work that we do. The next slide is the FY20 projected revenue shortfall, and Kristen just went through that in pretty significant detail. But essentially what you see in the chart below is the revenue and expenditure summary and the variance in the budget. And I want to just focus on the $500,000 from the general government transfer. As Ms. Michael indicated, we are anticipating, as part of being, again, a good partner and sort of taking the bad with the good, we are anticipating a $500,000 hit to the FY20 budget this year. And so, as was indicated, we do plan to expend $300,000 of our ending balance to help offset that $500,000. And then in addition to that, as Ms. Michael suggested, we're also going to address the budget shortfall in some other areas. As she said, we're going to realign compensation. We're going to look at salary and benefits and really bring those files down to as close as possible so that we can capture as much savings as we can within that. Utilizing some of the COVID-19 savings that includes, cleaning supplies, bus fuel, utility savings that we've experienced as well. And then we did have a conversation with principals and department heads over the last week and have talked to all of the finance techs around the system and shared with them that we are freezing all non-essential expenditures, which leads to the question is what's essential? And essentially what we have said is that we want our principals to bring to us their expenditures before they actually go forward with them to make sure that we understand what they are and whether or not they're aligned to our core mission. So there are going to be some things that are frozen, some of those accounts that we'll be able to capture as one-time savings. And then after all of that, if we aren't able to get enough to cover the gap, the $500,000 gap, which we're pretty sure we can do, we would utilize more of the fund balance. And again, just as a reminder, there's $450,000 in fund balance, and we intended to take $300,000 to cover it that way. The one thing I want to make sure that the public understands is that when you use one-time money to fix a hole in the budget, it's okay so long as it's not a recurring cost. And in this particular circumstance, because we're filling a gap that we are going to be able to take care of in next year's budget based on what we're going to share with you tonight, it's okay to use the one-time money to fill the 2020 budget because it isn't going to be a reoccurring cost that isn't covered in next year's budget. The bigger problem is if you use one-time money on operational expenditures and you don't have the budget for it for the following year, you create a deeper hole to begin your budgeting process. So in the next slide, we did want to talk about other funds that are available, and we mentioned these in the last meeting as well. And really it's making sure that we're taking care of the two funds that are outside of the operating accounts. And the first is the Community Service Fund, and the second is the Food Services Fund. The Community Services Fund, of course, is the fund that takes care of all of our community use and the like in our buildings. And then food service is what it says it is. But we are currently refunding payments that were made in advance of the COVID-19. So we are losing some revenue, and that was for community use specifically. Additionally, when we look at our employees, we are going to continue to pay our employees, as Ms. Michael indicated, based on the better average of the last two pay periods. And so if either of those two funds do come up short at year end and they don't have enough in their revenue accounts or their reserve accounts to cover it, we will need to make a transfer from the school operating budget. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that going in. So that leads me to our FY21 advertised budget update. And again, I'll just share very briefly. as I mentioned just before we came on the air, my kiddo plays the clarinet, and it's really nice to have some music in the house. And so she has been practicing, and I hope that these kiddos in this picture are as well. But the FY21 budget, here you'll see the original budget summary. And just as a reminder to everybody, and I won't go through all of this again, but the FY21 budget proposal by the superintendent, and then the adopted advertised budget by the school board, was a proposed advertised budget of about 4.4% increase from the 2020 budget to the 2021 budget. And there were a couple of things in there that were looking really good. One was the city revenue and also the state revenue. And as a consequence of that, we had an expenditure list of items that we really felt like we could do a lot with. And so I want to talk about those tonight. So in the end, I think what we know now is that we obviously have a different revenue picture, particularly from the general government side, which indicates that we have to do some things very differently. So let me talk about the general government budget transfer. In our original budget discussions, we did contemplate and continue to consider in the FY21 budget, our discussions with the city manager and CFO, so Wyatt Shields and Kieran Bawa, about focusing on our shared challenges. And we really did want to thank them, first of all, for the work that they did the year prior with respect to our revenue sharing framework. We certainly were the beneficiaries of that. And to be honest, it really helped the city, I think, in helping understand and in some ways have a predictable funding need from the schools. And as a consequence of looking at that, what we recognize is that the transfer is going to reflect a reduction of $500,000 compared to the current year, which in the end is a $1.8 million lower transfer than the budget guidance that we had in December from the general government. And just as a reminder, we get multiple pots of money, but the general government represents about 86% of our budget. As a consequence of all of this, the general government is going to need to make some reductions on their side to address their shortfall. We will have to make some adjustments on our side to address the shortfall. And we have been collaboratively working together on this. And we have commitments from Wyatt Shields and Kieran Bawa that we will continue to monitor revenue next year and be able to appropriately adjust if a better revenue picture comes in throughout the year. So that's the general government. The next is state aid. There is a little bit of a good news story here. And again, I sort of hesitate to say that because I think I said that once before and it sort of came back to bite me. But the governor's amendments this year are important to us, but they are not a huge piece or a huge impact of what is going to happen to us with respect to state aid. So the governor's amendments that were made would return school counselor ratios back to the 2020 levels. And I know one of the things that we are absolutely interested in making sure is that our kids have adequate school counselors. And as you'll remember, all of the money that we were going to receive in state aid was going to be able to be used for other things than what they were designated because the City of Falls Church already exceeds what the new counselor ratios were going to be. So although we are reverting back to the 2020 levels, I do want to let everybody know, including the board, that we have school counselor ratios that already exceed what the new ratios would have been had they not reverted back to the past. Some other examples of things that are happening, and this is where we are hearing from the State Department of Education, as we mentioned in our last meeting, is that they're going to do budget unallotments, which is a suspension of funding and not a cut. And I think that's important because it suggests in some ways that if revenues come back in a more positive way, that they will be able to fill in some of those gaps. But the first place that they looked at was the cost of competing adjustment. As everybody is aware, that's the extra increment that folks in Northern Virginia receive because of the cost to live up in this area. The at-risk add-on, which is for students that would be considered at risk, the general fund portion of that money is going away, but that is a joint funded account also through the lottery. and the lottery funds will remain, but the general fund portion from the state is going to go away. You might recall